Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here for yet another video on how to do your own research, but I'm trying to make this one more general. Now, last year I did a video on how you can look up herbs for specific ailments, and I'll go ahead and link to that one below, but I really am going to be covering some of that, but going more into depth on just health issues in general. And really, this type of research can apply to just about anything you're wanting to look up, whether it be gardening techniques and so on. So obviously, having some good hard copy books are going to be top most important, but also learning how to do various types of searches in your browser to be able to use the internet as a good source to find information is really important. A lot of people just don't even have a clue how to start. Now, I had to learn how to do this on my own because back when I was running the dance school and we were doing shows and I was making most of the costumes, finding the right fabrics that I needed for a specific costume was not easy, and I had to learn how to reword my searches to find exactly what I was looking for, and I always managed to do it, though sometimes it could take me several days to find exactly what it was I was looking for. So I learned ways of wording things when it comes to searching for stuff, and then I learned how to implement these same type of search methods when I was trying to find all the things that I could do in order to heal our thyroid so that we could get off the thyroid medication, which we have been off for over 9 years now. Let's say you've got a specific ailment. The first thing you have to understand is that there is not one herb that's either a cure-all or that you can cure your thyroid by taking an herb, or cure your blood pressure, or cure your high cholesterol, or whatever the ailment is by taking some specific herb. That's, in fact, even a whole bunch of herbs that can be good for any one ailment aren't necessarily going to cure the problem. It can help, but it may not cure. So you also have to understand getting to the root cause of some of your problems. So why is your thyroid malfunctioning to begin with? It's usually not the thyroid itself, it's usually an underlying issue. Same thing goes with chronic high blood pressure. High blood pressure is important for certain times in our life, certain times in the day. We need our blood pressure to go up, but if it's constantly very high, which you also have to understand, blood pressure should not be a one-size-fits-all. We should not all have the same exact blood pressure. It should vary just as much as our skin color, the type of hair we have, and the size of our body. So that's something you have to understand. For anybody to set one single blood pressure number, that's what everybody should fall under, is just wrong to begin with. But again, if it's chronically very high all the time, even when you're resting and you're calm, you have to find the root problem. It's not the blood pressure that's the problem, it's something else. So you got to find that first and then figure out what it is that's causing these different health ailments. So different types of internal issues, one of the most common one can be gut disorders, can cause a varying array of different health problems, from rashes to thyroid problems to blood pressure and so on. So you got to learn that first, obviously. Herbs aren't meant to be used just to cure symptoms. And a lot of the drugs you're going to get from your doctor are actually for that. They're just about curing symptoms without taking care of the root of the problem. And so that's why we have to go back to that to start with. But at least with herbs, even if you're using them to help with some of your symptoms to be able to cope, at least you're going to be a far more healthy doing that than taking a prescription drug that's going to cause even more symptoms. Now, obviously, herbs are going to have their own issues depending on you and your health conditions, and some herbs should not be combined with certain types of medications. So when you're doing your research, these are things you have to look into. So if you're saying, let's say, just like with me with a thyroid, you're saying, okay, best herbs for hypothyroidism or best herbs for hyperthyroidism. Find that out. Then, if you are on a medication, find out if any of those herbs are going to have a bad side effect when combined with this particular medication, or is it going to weaken the medication so it's no good? Which a lot of times that's the case, which should tell you something about the herb itself, that it might actually be effective if it's weakening the effect of the pharmaceutical you're taking. But there could also be some bad reactions with the two. Now, what tends to happen is doctors will give you a prescription for this, and then when you have a side effect from that prescription, they'll give you a prescription for this side effect, and then when you have a side effect from that one, they'll give you a prescription from that, until you're taking a whole handful of prescription medications, all because of this one disorder you had in the first place back here that never got dealt with in the first place. So coming back to the actual research again, so one of the key phrases when you're looking for herbs is to put in best herbs for, and then put that disorder or that thing that you're trying to take care of. And then also look up not just herbs, but natural remedies for ... because not everything is going to be all about herbs. Just like when you're trying to heal a sprain, it's not going to be just about herbs. Herbs can help heal a sprain, yes, but there's more involved in helping a sprain or a break to heal than just taking herbs. And that's going to apply to any other health issues that you have. It's good to know the herbs, but it's also good to know the just general natural remedies, which could be something as simple as resting or applying heat or getting a good amount of sleep or stopping your alcohol consumption or caffeine consumption or whatever it is. And then here's another thing. If you're already growing certain herbs, or you discovered something either in the wild and you found out what it was and were curious if it was edible, or something that started growing in your garden, or something that you're already growing in your garden because you like how pretty it is, like a certain type of flower, you can look up, is this edible? So are daylilies edible? Maybe you're growing daylilies, but you had no idea you could eat them, and you look that up and you find out, wow, all parts of the daylily are edible. And also learn, though, what parts are edible and whether or not those different parts are better for you if they're cooked or raw. Some things are going to be best raw simply because you're going to get the most benefits and nutrients from it, but some things are going to be hard on your gut if you eat them raw, so it may be best to cook them. You got to look into all of this stuff when you're doing this, your research, and not just start eating and taking things willy-nilly. And then obviously you also have to consider, like I'm always saying, other health conditions you may have. And if that could, maybe you're taking this for this health condition, but if you already have this other health condition, maybe this herb isn't good for this over here. Or if you're allergic to anything specific, these things are going to come into play. Your age, whether you're giving it to a child or an elderly person, and if you're on any medications, as I already mentioned, and also if you're pregnant or nursing, these are also things that you have to look into before you just start taking anything to cure something else. Now, usually any of these things, like when you're talking herbs, in a lot of cases your herbs, we have culinary herbs that are also highly medicinal. Obviously, we can use these in culinary purposes because we're using them in small amounts. Most likely isn't going to have an effect on any of the issues I mentioned, unless of course you're allergic to it. But it's taking anything in a medicinal dose that you have to be most careful of if any of these other things are factors. Now, I've had several videos I've done on book recommendations, and I'll go ahead and go over a few again here. This right here is a pile of most of my herb books. I don't have a ton. I don't think a person needs a ton of herb books, but having a few really solid ones is important. And one of the things I tend to recommend a lot, these are actually both the same book. One is much older than the other. I actually found them both at a garage sale, and having a good encyclopedia of herbs is important. Now, the newer one, which is the illustrated one, Rodale's Herbs, this one is from the 70s, and this one I think was printed in the 90s. So this has illustrations, some color photos. That's very helpful if you can have something that has color photos, but also is in an encyclopedia format. That can be very helpful. So I do recommend the Rodale's. I also recommend getting yourself a book that's more to your area, wherever it is. So for us, Pacific Northwest medicinal plants, this is the one that Mary over at Mary's Nest had sent me just as a kind gesture, and it is an excellent book. So this is more tailored to our specific area with lots of great photos. So photos are important. Now I know if you have a smartphone, you can get certain types of apps that can identify plants, so you can take a picture of the plant, and that's also a very good source. So if you got something you don't know what it is, take a photo of it. You have that app, it can help identify it. Sometimes it's not super accurate, so make sure you take a few pictures and work with that as well. And then from there you can also then look up that specific thing. If you find out what it is it edible, is it medicinal, and how can I use it? But anyway, something more local is good. And then this one was sent to me by a subscriber in Australia. So if you live in Australia, this is an excellent book to have on hand. And most of this is going to be tailored to Australians, but that doesn't mean we don't grow some of this stuff here as well. But anyway, another excellent source, again, especially if you're living in Australia. And then one that I mention most frequently is Amy's book on the Homesteader's Herbal Companion. Excellent book. Amy is a great person. She also has a YouTube channel. She doesn't put a lot of stuff up there, but she does have some highly valuable information. I'll put a link to her channel as well as a link to her book down below. Well, actually, her book is always linked in my description box. And then another good one that's good for value is the Prepper's Natural Medicine, one of the first books I bought. No colored illustrations, in fact, really no illustrations whatsoever, but for the value of it, it's paper book, it's small, but it's got some really good information in here. This is by Kat Ellis. Another one I do recommend. I think I do also have this one linked in my description box. And then this one, I don't talk about these ones as much because they are definitely much more expensive, but it was recommended to me by WeTree. So I went ahead and got them. I found them used and it was the best price I could find. I think I paid $100 a piece. So it's a 2-part set. And if it's still available, I will link to it down below if I can find the link. I got them through Amazon. Again, I got them used to get the best price, and even then it was still $100, but they're in perfect shape. They do have some illustrations, but also some very thorough information on almost every herb you can think of. So sometimes what I can't find in some of these other books, I'm able to find in here, but this is why also having a good encyclopedia and then a book that's more tailored to your area is also important, because not everything is in here. And maybe I can find it in another book, or I can find it by searching online. So knowing how to do those searches online is also very important, but of course hard copies, you need to have these on hand. And then another thing I highly recommend, and I did mention this in the video I did on building your preparedness library, but forgot to say the name of it. So this particular book is the American Medical Association Encyclopedia of Medicine. It's a long name, that's why I never can remember it. And I just totally spaced it. And I'm sorry about that, people, when I did that video, which I'll go ahead and put that link down below, because I talked about, oh, there are other types of books besides just this. But having a good book like this one is, it's at least 25 years old. I know I've had it longer than that because my youngest son is 25 and I had it for at least several years before he was even born. And I remember needing this when he was born because it helped me to identify and actually self-diagnose correctly a problem that I was having right after he was born. And the doctors couldn't, at that time, the doctors were not able to figure out what it was. And by the time they finally sent me to a specialist over in Seattle, I already knew, thanks to this book, I just needed confirmation and then know what to do about it. And what it was, in case you're curious, some women, it's a rare condition that affects about 1 in 60,000 women. And it's a rash that you typically will get in pregnancy or right after you give birth. And it can break out all over your whole body. It is horrible. It is so uncomfortable. And it can get worse with each child. Thankfully, with my firstborn, I didn't deal with it. They still don't fully know everything about it. But I was able to figure it out through this book. And the other time I was able to diagnose an issue in our family was when my oldest son, at the age of 5, had Giardia. and we couldn't figure out what was going on with them. I had my medical guide on hand, so I pretty much knew by the time I still took him to the doctor because we still had to get him diagnosed, you know, get the proper tests done so that we could get it taken care of. But I at least knew what I was dealing with by the time I got in there, and I was right. So I had figured it out. So having something, a good book on hand, and I recommend this. I don't know if there's any updated ones, but I actually, after I'd had this book for several years, I had went into a doctor's office for a checkup or something and happened to see this very same book on the doctor's bookshelf. So I knew I had the right one. But I even do have this one I found. I bought it mostly because I do like to collect vintage and antique books. This is from, I think, the 1920s, and it is called The Home Physician, A Guide to Health. And obviously some things in here aren't going to be totally applicable, but then again, back then, people weren't as dependent on doctors as they are now. So even though there's some stuff in here where they tell you, yes, you need to go to the doctor and get surgery if it's appendicitis and so on, it is also about home health care. So not only was it a great find for $1 just to have this great antique book, because officially it is antique. As long as it's at least 100 years old, it can officially be considered antique. I still think it's a good idea to find the most updated medical guide you can, because the condition I talked about that I had, and I believe it's something that stays with us our whole life and can affect us at different ages. But at the time, they had a different name for it, and they have since changed it to gestational pemphigoid, which I believe is still an incorrect name, because in my own studies and just paying attention to stuff and knowing that I had a bad rash when I went through puberty and have had to deal with it off and on through the years, especially when I first started going through menopause, I don't think it should be called gestational pemphigoid. But anyway, that's just an example. So just by doing my own research through the book, and then later when we had internet, because back when I just diagnosed these two things that I mentioned, that was long before internet. And since then, I've been able to do even more research and find out more about some of this stuff. And that's how I also learned about the change of name that from what it was called in this book. So that's why it's also good to find the most updated one you can find. So I'll put a link to this down below. Hopefully there I can find one that is more current. But if nothing else, this is still great. This was worth every penny I paid for it. Even though they'll say never self-diagnose anything, well, there's truth in the fact that when you get online and you start putting in symptoms, you can scare the crud out of yourself. You have to be very careful with that and just take everything you read, just take the facts, learn the different things. So if you've got a strange rash and you're looking it up, look at the images that they give you. It can be kind of gross sometimes, but looking at images of anything that you can see that's going on can be very helpful, because you can go, nope, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it, just by looking at the images. Read all the descriptions of some of the different things. And just because, like, here's the thing, is rashes, for example, they can be so broad. They can be a sign of so many different problems that just saying, oh, you have a rash all over your body, oh no, that means you're dying of this and that. No, it doesn't. It could be something as simple as an allergic reaction. It could be something that was just some kind of viral rash that came and went and it's gone, and now you don't have to worry about it anymore. You just never know. So make sure, so yes, you have to be careful with self-diagnosis, because you could scare yourself into a panic. Don't do that. Most of the time, when you start looking into this stuff, it's not going to be the worst case scenario like you're going to find. You have to take everything listed in there into consideration. And then when you become more certain that especially if you're certain it's something that's serious that you do have to see a doctor for, then you can go see the doctor. And even if you're uncertain, go ahead and see the doctor, just to can't rule out that it might be anything very serious. And then if it is, then at least you can consider the advice they're going to give. But I always say, don't jump right on to the prescription medications they're going to throw at you. Go ahead and take the written prescription. Do some research though on that prescription at home. So this is important too. Know all the side effects. Make sure you get the insert for every medication you are given, any kind of shot you are given, no matter what it is. Ask for the insert. You want all the information you can get. Make sure you understand all the ins and outs. For example, coming back to when they finally were able to say, yes, this is gestational pemphigoid, though they were calling it something different back then. And they, at that time, put me on steroids. Now, if I had it all to do different, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have gone that route. But I tell you, it was a relief, because the steroids don't cure the problem, because it's an autoimmune disorder that you can't just cure. It's always there. But it did get rid of the rash so I could actually function throughout the day, because it was horrible. It was from here all the way down to the soles of my feet. Thankfully, not on my face, thankfully. But it was miserable. But I know better how to deal with that without having to go on steroids. So I wouldn't do that if I had to do it all over again. But coming back to that, I just had my son. He was only 2 weeks old at the time that they came back with this diagnosis. And I asked the doctor, well, can I still keep nursing my son while I'm on this? And he kind of, oh yeah, it should be fine. I followed my gut instinct in that, at least, and I didn't continue to nurse him while I was on the steroid medication. Now, if I had to do it all over again, it would have been the other way around. I would have found another way to deal with it, not gone on the steroids, and kept nursing my son. And of course, I since found out that you should never be nursing your child while you're taking pretty much any prescription drug, but certainly something like a steroid. Prednisone was what they had put me on. But yeah, and I only stayed on it as long as I absolutely had to. I weaned myself off a couple times, had to go back on it just in order to deal with it. But by the way, if you're dealing with a really itchy rash, one thing I found is that neem oil with a little clove oil mixed in is very helpful. Neem oil is very soothing and healing, and the clove oil will numb it and take away the itch. It is, if I knew this back then, I would have been turned into that instead. So anyway, being able to do the research on your own, though there are great doctors out there, and I know a lot of times I make comments that make it sound like I just don't like doctors and I don't trust any of them. No, there's good doctors out there. They have good intentions and they mean well, but even the most well-meaning doctor they're still trained in a certain way. And usually it's not in natural remedies. It's always in the pharmaceutical way of dealing with things. Go see your doctor, get a diagnosis if needed, but then do your own research, or even ask your doctor outright when he hands you this prescription, is there a more natural way besides taking this? It's very likely he may not know, but he might. Here's what you also have to understand is, even if that doctor is well learned in natural remedies, he still has to prescribe you a prescription drug. That's what he has to do, or she. If they're a good doctor though, and you ask them, they will give you that other information as well. There was a doctor that was here for a short time that was that very way, and I appreciated that about him. So let me mention one more thing when it comes to internet research. Now, I gave you a couple of different ways, a couple of different search criteria that you can use, best herbs for, natural remedies for, is this herb or this thing safe to do or take when I'm on this medication, so on and so forth. Also learn how to reword the search if you're not finding what you're looking for to begin with. Reword it. Try a different way to lay out that sentence and see if you get different results when you're searching. And then another very, very important thing that I have to stress is when you start hitting different websites, pay attention to the website. If there's a lot of pharmaceutical advertisements in there, it's most likely going to be geared toward unnatural remedies while putting down the natural ones. But even going to the ones that are all more natural ones, you have to be careful with that, because a lot of times the information is just people doing what I'm doing right here and just giving you some information, but they might not have a degree. they might be basing it on something they heard from someone else. I've made that mistake too, where I went to a website, found this information, then later somebody told me, well, that's not true. So I looked it up more thoroughly and found out that this information was right, that the first information I got was wrong. So now when I always kind of try to pick things apart and see if I can find consistency in the information, both all the way across the board, both from places like WebMD, which is good for some things, but I don't depend on it for everything. It's good for some certain ways of looking things up, and then going to the other side and looking at the more natural websites and comparing the two. Dr. Axe has been a good place for me to find good information, but not just there either. There's not going to be one site you're going to find all the best information. You have to compare everything. And also remember, even places like the CDC.com and FDA.com, you can find information more specific on medications that you might be given. If you can't get it from your doctor, a lot of times you can look those up at places like that and find more specifics in there that you might not be able to find anywhere else. So even those places can be helpful. I have used them to research actual facts on certain things are actually there on their website that other people will say are conspiracy theory, but you can find it right there. It's right there on their websites because they're supposed to have that information public. You just have to know how to look it up, and it can be dry, hard reading and take hours to find out some real specific information like what's going into that particular jab that they're sticking in your arm. Not all of it's conspiracy theory, people. Look it up for yourself, but know where to look for it. Some stuff is conspiracy theory, and that's all it is theory, but some stuff is factual. So you have to really research those things too. That all plays into this same thing. So let me reiterate again, though, about the herbs. Remember, there's not one herb that's a cure-all for everything, even though there's a couple of them out there like holy basil and black seed that they try to make claims that will cure everything. Yes, they are wonderful, great herbs, and I highly recommend them, growing them if you can, or stocking up on them, but they are not cure-alls for everything. You can't just fall back to one thing and expect to cure every ailment you have or will have. And also, you can't just take an herb or a cluster of herbs in place of a medication. Most cases, when you have some kind of something you're trying to heal or get better from, there's going to be other things that you need to do. It might have to come down to changing your whole diet or the way you function or getting out and getting some exercise. All right, well, I hope you found this video helpful, and don't forget to check out the different links I'll be putting down below, both to videos and to some book recommendations and more, and even a couple of websites that you might find helpful, which, by the way, for me changes all the time. I'll find some that are more helpful than others one time than another. So I'll try to put a few of those down below. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.